President William Ruto of Kenya has expressed dissatisfaction over the treatment of African leaders when they go abroad. Speaking at the Mo Ibrahim Governance Conversation in Nairobi, Ruto said African leaders are in some instances mistreated when they travel to attend global meetings, and in response to this mistreatment, he says all 54 African leaders will no longer be traveling for the meetings, but will be sending representatives. Let's hear a bit from that speech.
The decision that we have made as AU is that going forward, if there is going to be a discussion between Africa and any other country, we are going to be represented by the chair, the outgoing chair, the bureau.
Chair of the commission or the chair
and the chair of the Rex, and we have 5 Rex. That should be sufficient for, a meeting of maybe 6, 7. Yeah. That should be able to represent Africa. And that is the position I am taking as the president of Kenya. For any other meeting that we are going to have with all these requests that we have a meeting between Africa and one other country, we respect the sovereignty of others. I think to ask for reciprocation is not to ask for too much.
No.
And for us to agree that let us have this kind of setup. The only, because I had a conversation with President Kagame, and he actually led that particular position. I have had a conversation with Prime Minister Abiy. He believes very strongly that that should be the position of our continent. Because, as you have said, if we don't respect ourselves, nobody is going to respect us. And we should be able to take that kind of decision. Yeah. And part of that respecting ourselves is when we say African problems, African solutions. We must be serious about the solutions. It cannot be rhetoric. It cannot be talk. It must be accompanied by what realistically and practically.
The concerns covered in that conversation emanated from a look at the management of the African Union, AU, and why it is an imperative to improve its powers and relevance. I mentioned this to contextualize his comments as I welcome my guest, Alistair Soyode, former presidential candidate and former chairman, Nigeria in Diaspora Organization, London, United Kingdom. Thank you for giving us your time. We also have Nweke, Global Affairs Analyst. He is in Brussels, Belgium. Thank you, gentlemen, for your time. Let's start with you, Alistair. President Ruto has, he was part of the action he has described as not intelligent. There are debates over this now. What's your reaction to those who were skeptical of his introspection, describing it as mere words?
Well, thank you very much for having me. And indeed, what he has said and shared with the global community, especially the African leaders, is very key, is very important. And the question really goes back to how serious, just like you probably mentioned, how serious is the comment of what he has said? Will the African leaders be strong enough to decide and actually do send somebody to go and represent the African continent? And in true sense of what he has shared with us, Africa has more than 1 billion people on the continent. And sometimes, to be honest, it's kind of a look really ridiculous for a nation, no matter where it is, to invite all our African leaders to come for a summit. Just one country with 54 African nations. Nigeria, South Africa, Kenya top on the list of African countries with good income, good return, good economy, and good population, and our diaspora community are doing very well around the world. Yes, so I definitely agree with what he's saying, but now we just have to wait and see if Africa as a continent can really implement and send somebody to represent her when a nation or a country call for a summit with African leaders. And there is no doubt that Africa, for her to be respected, she needs to respect herself. All the crises that we're facing on the continent is more or less to do with our leadership and the way they present the continent, the way they present the countries that they represent.
The points you're making are valid, but my question was framed differently. This is your reaction to his statement. My question really is about the skepticism being expressed. He was part of the African leaders that was treated, put in a bus. He was at the burial of the Queen and some other instances. So my question to you is the skepticism to his words.
Well, you know, sometimes things may happen for you to realize how bad it looks. Now, for him, surely enough, attending the Queen's burial ceremony, allow him to evaluate and now becoming the president of Kenya, to see the difference between probably when they were in London for that ceremony, they realized some of the Western nations were driven in their own single individual cars. Or, again, for what we may classify here in the United Kingdom or London, is that some situation demand that people actually convoy in a bus. It happens in Nigeria, likewise, when there are major events, rather than allowing people to drive individual cars. There are situations where you go to Eagle Square, for example, and join a single bus that takes you to that final destination. So yes, what he said is right. And the question goes back to probably, as I mentioned earlier, is if the African leaders are ready and willing to implement what he said. Yes, it is true that in many situations such things do happen, but I will not complain complain about that treatment that people were put in a bus to reach a destination. It then go back to how serious are the other Western nations who are inviting the African leaders to come for a summit. Rather than when they arrive, you use one single way of convoying them to the destination or where the summit is going to take place. I will not complain about that at all.
All right, Collins, let's come to you. Alistair is in support of the comment by the president. A lot of persons are on his side of the divide. But there are also those who have criticized his comments as being divisive and counterproductive to the goal of fostering unity and cooperation among African nations. Their argument is that such summits are crucial for addressing key issues facing the continent and that boycotting them would only serve to isolate African nations from the rest of the world. On what side of the divide are you on this debate and why?
Felicity, I guess I would like to pitch my tent somewhere in between the two divides. And I do this because I'm not quite certain of the specific point that William Ruto was making. Now, I do not.
Okay, let me just give you a little background. I don't know if you watched. I don't know if you watched the conversation, the entire conversation. That was why I tried to contextualize it. His narrative was coming from the perspective that there is need to rejig the management of the African Union. And he was trying to portray this argument by saying that if we don't respect ourselves, other people will not respect us. So that was the context he was coming from. And then he was trying to explain the treatment that was given to the leaders.
Those two topics, those two issues could and should be treated independent of each other. Now, efficient and effective way of managing its affairs, that actually does away with all the wastages and so on and so forth, is one argument that anybody cannot fault. Now, mixing it up with, claims of African leaders being disrespected and creating the impression that that is the reason that Africa now wants to rejig is, frankly speaking, very, very confusing. And as a matter of fact, if you ask me, I think it is rather populistic. Now, I don't know the details of, African leaders being disrespected. The simple example he cited was being conveyed to the meeting in a bus. Now, I don't know the world where Mr. Ruto is living, but where I come from, the perspective I represent is the fact that, yes, group travel, public transportation is a fantastic thing for the individual, but also for the environment. I understand that African leaders are not used to, traveling in such a manner. Part of rejigging Africa is beginning to learn that it is an efficient way of traveling.
Collins, let me take your mind back a bit to why this seems to be an issue for some people on the continent. They're saying for that conveying, the President of the United States was conveyed in a beast, his official vehicle, in company of the French President, Emmanuel Macron. It was just the African leaders that were conveyed in a bus, to my understanding of the story at the time. And that's where there seemed to be some hesitancy as to, the mode of transportation. But I understand what you're saying, that it seems we have not moved up, just the way Alistair was saying.
Hello?
There was any discrimination, African leaders being treated differently from their Western counterparts, or definitely that has to be condemned and condemned resolutely. I live here, I work here, and I've been doing so for decades. I cannot deny the fact that there are very serious discriminatory, practices that go on here. I will find it shocking that such is also extended to, African leaders. And so indeed, if they were treated, differently from their counterparts, that is condemnable, and indeed it is an abomination. However,
Okay, I think the network took off. So let's just move to Alistair quickly. When Collins comes, we'll let him complete his thought in the interest of time. I want us to look at the... Okay, Collins, I understand you're back. Could you continue?
Yes, I am. I was still hearing you. And so the point I was making is this. If African leaders actually want to respond to it in an efficient manner, you don't do so by taking a decision that will affect. So they need to make a distinction between conversations that require one-on-one, solution, whereby I will give a specific example where to unlock the impasse with evacuation of Nigerians, who were transiting through Egypt. It took the president of Nigeria to call the president of Egypt for that to happen. So they should be able to make a decision between.
Okay, we'll come back to you, Collins. Let me bring Alistair in to quickly speak on this. You are in support of the ideas being posited by President Ruto. But this is not, and probably wouldn't be the last time, the vexing questions over the powers of the AU comes up. Knowing and doing are two different things. Has there been any progressive changes to the AU over similar insights like that's been shared by the president that encourages some optimism that the words of President Ruto will yield some fruit that we will see?
Well, you see, the Mo Ibrahim Index, which was a platform whereby they want to evaluate the performance of past leaders on the African continent, is a good project whereby, as we said, recognizing what the African leaders have been doing, and at the end of their term, recognizing who should win on the prize being given by Mo Ibrahim Index. That hasn't taken place for a very long time, because up to now, it's like they have not yet been able to find a leader that is leaving office at the end of his tenure, going through the process of selecting a winner. Nevertheless, based on what we are now talking about, really, we have to look on the continent to ask our leaders if they are willing and ready to do what they say they're doing. Just like my colleague mentioned, Collins, we have to ask ourselves, what is the primary reason why our leaders are there and not achieving what they want to achieve at the end of the day? Now, for example, this coronation that is taking place this weekend, we need to wait and see if the leaders that are coming to town are going to be conveyed to the churches and other places where this event are going to take place, and then look at the Western leaders as well coming into town. You know, when you talk about the American president is being treated differently from any other president in the world, including China and Russia. While on the African continent, Nigeria is supposed to be the leading leader in terms of being recognized and having the privilege of giving the office to the Western nation. And what do I mean by here is recognizing that we have somebody who can represent the African continent. Now, until when our leaders are keen and respecting, just like the president said, respecting themselves and selling the ideology of Africa need to be free and Africa need to be independent, we may not get to that position where other nations, especially non-African nations, begin to respect Africa as we need them to respect us. So my take is definitely what he has said is in the direction of what we hope Africa can achieve, especially with some new African nation where we're having new leaders emerging, new leaders that can represent the African continent. Maybe they'll be able to make the representation. Maybe they'll be able to present the situation that Africa needs to be respected. And then, of course, even in terms of standing for Africa as a continent, we need to say something in that direction. And for us who are in the diaspora, I think that's what we have always been doing, trying to represent the African continent. But again, when the stories come out from our side, and making representation by our leaders, not standing on what they say they're going to do. That is the reason why as well that we may find ourselves being pushed to the back of the ladder, to the back of the room, in trying to negotiate what needs to be given and the respect that Africa needs to receive from any Western nation.
Yeah, I wanted us to move away from what he said, because you both have already talked about what we need to take away from those comments that he made. But there's something you said I just want to reference, and that's the fact that what happens with this coronation will be an indication of whether the words were mere words or it was followed with action. Collins, let me come back to you. One of the things that the Kenyan president talked about, and I'm focusing on the AU because I think that was the crux of the matter, was that ceding some powers from presidents to the AU will increase the ability to effectively work for the continent. Knowing us, you know, a continent that's ravaged by power-hungry merchants, is that something that is plausible?
Sorry, Felicity, I didn't quite get your question. The audio was warped, really. I didn't quite hear you.
Okay, so I'm trying to, one of the things, because I'm trying to, wanted us to focus on the real concern here, and that's building AU to be as strong as the Euro and other groups. And one of the things that he suggested, that's William Ruto, is that some powers of presidents in Africa should be ceded to the AU to strengthen it, to make it more effective in its work for the continent. And I was saying that considering that we have people who like power a lot in Africa, is that a possibility that presidents of African countries will cede a little of their powers to the AU in order to strengthen it?
It is inevitable. Body that provides a unified front for Africa. Now, as long as that is done with exclusive respect of the sovereignty of those countries, that is actually not a big issue. I mean, we have that playing out here in the European Union. It is not an easy issue. Some countries will quite easily understand the need for collective action, while other countries will continue to actually contest ceding power to the central body. That we have.
Okay.
To cede some of its power to the EU. So it is a delicate matter, one that needs to be handled very carefully. But I can tell you that in principle, it is an absolute necessity. And if Africa wants to be strong and to negotiate in the best interest of Africa and to achieve the so-called Africa solution, it is inevitable to actually cede some power to the EU.
Collins, I'm so sorry. The network is really acting up, but we did get your point. Quickly, in 40 seconds, if you can, Alistair, because we're out of time. In your view, what future do you see for the African Union that will strengthen, that will be strong enough to do things that we want for the continent?
Well, thanks. I think the African Union, as the representative of the African continent, within the continent and outside the continent, need to be more independent. They need to be precise on what they want Africa to be seen and recognized as. They need to come together really for the benefit of the African people as well. Now, ceding power to them might not be easy because, as you rightly mentioned, some of the African leaders need to be seen independently going out to the world, negotiating deals that will benefit their country and their nation and their people. So the African Union, for me, they need to be strengthened. And at the end of the day, likewise, just like Nigeria exploring and utilizing her diaspora, the African Union needs to come together to tap into the best of her diasporan community out there so that they will be able to bring in the skill, not just by nation, but by Africa as a continent.
All right, gentlemen, thank you very much for giving us your time and sharing your thoughts with us.
Thank you.